Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another conversation. If you're here, then it's clear you believe that we've got to keep talking. Today, I'm going to focus on the Gujarati community. There's no doubt about the fact that the Gujaratis have had a massive impact on the fate and fortunes of our country. Whether from Mahatma Gandhi to Prime Minister Modi, from Jamshedji Tata to Dhirubhai Ambani, from Ranjit Singh ji, I could go on and on and on. There are iconic Gujaratis in all walks of life. But who are they really? Why do certain stereotypes stick? And what is the Gujarati community's idea of India today? Salil Tripathi, journalist, human rights activist, and writer, probes these questions and poses some of his own in this really engaging, very easy to read, deeply researched, and filled with anecdotes and his own personal experiences as a Gujarati. Called The Gujaratis, quite simply. So, Salil, thank you for joining me from Baroda today.
Yes, that's right. From a Gujarati city.
Let's start with the question of why Gujaratis are so successful in settling down in other parts of the world and thriving. I mean, they're intrepid travelers. They go to unknown destinations, they set up communities and thrive. And you're one of them, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm an outsider twice removed because I was not born in Gujarat, nor did I grow up in Gujarat. But I went to a Gujarati medium school and grew up in a Gujarati home in Bombay or Mumbai. But when I was born, it was called Bombay, so I'll keep it that way. And so yes, I do dream and count and think in Gujarati. That the first language that comes to me. So that's one removal, not being from the state, but speaking the language. And the other removal is that since 1991, I've lived out of India. So that brings me another perspective altogether. But to speak about what you were saying about Gujaratis creating thriving communities abroad, one of the lines from a Gujarati poem that a lot of Gujaratis are very proud of, and ironically, not ironically, but appropriately enough, it's written by someone who's not a Hindu, Ardeshar Khabardar, a Parsi poet, who wrote this wonderful line called "Jhan jhan vase ek Gujarati, tyan sada kal Gujarat," which basically means that wherever there is a Gujarati, it is Gujarat forever. And whether you go to Grey Street in Durban, which is now called Yusuf Dadu Street, or whether you go to east coast of Singapore, or you go to a place like Harrow and Neasden in London, or Leicester and its Belgrave Road, or you go to Hoboken in New Jersey, you're basically in a mini Gujarat at that time. Because not only do people talk to you in Gujarat, there's a nice little joke, that, and it's a joke, so it is not a real story. But there's an Englishman who has lived in Malaya in the rubber plantations for 30 or 40 years, and he returns to Britain. And Britain has totally changed because it's become far more cosmopolitan. And he goes back to Harrow, where his friend Mr. Smith used to stay. And he remembers the address, 49 Green Street or whatever it is, and knocks the door. And a woman in a sari opens the door. She looks at it and gently doesn't close it, but shuts it slightly, keeps it ajar, and shouts, "Koi goro aayo che," which means a white person has come.
Yeah.
And a man comes wearing, banyan and t-shirt and pajamas and said, "Yes, what you want?" So he says, "My friend Mr. Smith used to live here. Can I meet?" "Oh, you, Mr. Smith? All your letters are here." And he gives him a big stack of letters. So he said, "No, I'm not Mr. Smith. I've come here to meet Mr. Smith. He used to live here for 30 years." And what the man says is that, "Oh, Mr. Smith, no foreigners are living here." So he's in Britain, but he sees the white person there as a foreigner. It's that much of an assimilation that has taken place. And it is, and the flip side is that it's probably one of the few parts in Britain where there's a sign in Gujarati on the street saying, "Ahin thukwani madha che," which means you
No
are
spitting allowed here.
Yeah. And you don't find it elsewhere in England saying, "Do not spit." But here at least it's written Gujarati right away. Yeah.
In your book, you talk about the fact that Gujarat being a coastal state, a state with many ports and which has seen seafaring trade over centuries. Is that one of the reasons that made Gujaratis such intrepid travelers? I mean, you have Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi set out, to South Africa from there to as a lawyer to work on a legal
Yes.
dispute there. And you have many Gujaratis who settled in East Africa. We know since then they have, all of them had to seek refuge in UK for the most part. So give me a tell us
Yes.
why this migration happened out of Gujarat.
So there are two or three things, right? With every migration, there is a push factor and a pull factor.
Mm.
So the push factor was, of course, a drought. Saurashtra is not a very hospitable region, very dependent on rain.
Yeah.
And if the rains are poor, and Kutch even more so because of the run, the desert. And
Yes.
therefore, people were pushed out, whether they were Kapols or they were Vanias or they were Lohanas, they felt the need to be away. The other thing that was a push factor was the way the Sultans and then the Marathas ruled, because they tended to tax in a quite a penal way the
Mm.
business people. And the business people were the Kapols and the Lohanas and the Jains and the Banyas, and they were treated very badly because they were always asked to pay more and more taxes, regardless of whether it was a Hindu ruler like a Maratha or a Muslim ruler like a Sultan. And then the British came and they
Mm.
had created this port, Bombay. And they said, we are going to offer you rule of law,
Mm.
straight system, then you can come and trade, and no one will interfere if all you do is trade. So a
Mm.
lot of people were got by the promise. So the first Kapol, first Lohana, first Jain, first Parsi, a lot of them came. Many of them were teenage boys, penniless, and then went on to build empire. So Bombay became the first magnet for them. And the other thing they did was to follow the flag
Mm.
of the East India Company.
Yeah.
So if they went to Malaya, they would go to Malaya and become shroffs or moneylenders, or
Mm.
they would become middlemen in even not illegal, but at that time legal, but right now abhorrent trade of opium, for example.
Mm.
So some of the biggest suppliers of opium to China were Parsi and Gujarati
Yes.
traders,
Yeah.
Hindu and Jain, but
Yeah.
Gujarati traders.
Mm.
They were all involved with that. Or they went to East Africa and they started opening shops because they realized that Gujaratis were going, or not Gujaratis, but Indians there were going there to build the railways and work on the sugar plantation.
Mhm.
But they've quite rightly figured out that they are not necessarily going to develop a taste for African food. They will want their dal, they will want their rice, they will want their spices. So the Kutchi trader goes and sets up a shop. And there was a Ali Din Vishram who set up these shops along the train line that was being built in East Africa. And all of them, Karimji, Jivanji, they all started going there one by one and setting up and following the flag and setting up the rudiments of
Mm.
the trade. But we have to remember that they didn't merely follow the British trade. Vasco da Gama was totally lost when he reached Malindi in East Africa. He didn't know where to go. He was looking for India, and it was a Kanji Malam, a Kutchi trader there, who showed him the way and brought him to India at that time. Because for Indians and the Gujarati and Kutchi traders of that time,
Mm.
Indian Ocean was like a lake. They knew exactly each nook and cranny and corner and so on. So they have always been part of this milieu. In fact, when one British governor in Mombasa was surprised, and actually he said that, oh, so you are between us and Africa as the middleman. And apparently, one of the Gujarati traders said, no, you, the English, are the middlemen between us and Europe.
Tell me, Salil, what did it take for you to embark on this journey in terms of this is not something that could be, this kind of work takes a lot of time. And like I said in my introduction, there is deep research, there is a lot of reportage that you've included in terms of first-hand conversations and interviews. And of course, there's your own lived experience. How challenging was it to frame an entire community, and what are some of the things that you had to be mindful of, because these things can set people off, isn't it?
Yes, so but it's a great question, and we can talk for the next hour on it. I mean, one thing was that I thought I knew my community very well, and I thought I'll be able to write the book within a year or 2 years maximum, and that's also what my editor David thought.
Mm.
In the end, it took me 7 years of research and writing and 1 year of editing, so it's an 8 year worth of effort, and which is why it has become such a large book.
Yeah.
And one reason for that was that the more I probed, the more I figured out how much more I needed to know.
Mm.
Because I had preconceived notions about Gujaratis and I'd taken on board some of the criticisms of Gujaratis, such as Gujaratis not joining the army because there's no
Mm.
Gujarat regiment. You have the
Yeah.
Maratha regiment,
Yeah.
Sikh regiment, the Rajputana regiment, but there's no Gujarati regiment. And then I figured out that Gujaratis are not cowards,
Mm.
and B, if they do become part of the military, it is not by becoming soldiers. An army cannot walk on an empty stomach. We all know that.
Yeah.
Soldiers need food. They need civil supplies. And if you look at the logistics of Indian Army or the logistics of even the US Air Force, there are Gujarati engineers there working on the logistics and supply. One of them happens to be married to a cousin of mine, which is why I found out about this Gujarati subculture within
Actually,
the
this your
US.
book is peppered with a lot of relatives and extended family as well. Right from your ancestors to
Yes.
cousins like the one you just mentioned.
Yeah, but these were discoveries. I mean, I
Yeah,
didn't seek
sure.
out to
Yeah,
profile
of
him. Let's put
course.
it this way.
Yeah.
What happened was that when I was working on it, suddenly someone mentioned, but do you know this person is actually with the Air Force? I've never met him. I've only met him on Zoom because he's married a cousin of mine. And so we had this conversation, and he has serviced Air Force One when President Obama had visited India. So I thought it was a nice little anecdote. So these are
Yeah.
small incidents like that. I mean, in prominent, there are only 2 or 3 that keep coming repeatedly for good reason.
Yeah.
Indula Liagnik, who started the Mahagujarat
Yeah.
movement, who happened to be my
Which was
dad's
the
uncle.
movement for a separate state of
Indeed,
Gujarat.
indeed. And he happened to be an uncle of mine. So, not mentioning him was not an option.
Of
And
course.
likewise, the great Gujarati novel was Saraswati Chandra,
Yeah.
which again happened to have been written by my grandfather's uncle. So
Mm.
it wasn't something I could keep. But otherwise, no, I wouldn't say that it's full of that. I mean, they do feature only when appropriate.
Of course, of
Because,
course,
yeah,
of
India is a
course.
land of absolutes and abounds with relatives, as Pico Iyer once.
But, Salil, you mentioned that one of the things that that you encountered was this question or this charge about why Gujaratis are not in the army, why there's no regiment, are they not brave people? You would imagine that if anybody who sets sail across the seas, breaks caste barriers, and travels into unknown lands requires a great deal of bravery, of a different kind. But bravery never.
Absolutely. I was just going to talk about that because 2 people pointed out that to me, the late poet Niranjan Bhagat and the late sociologist Sonal Shukla. They both pointed this out to me, that it requires enormous courage to
Yeah.
go in a part of Africa where you don't speak the language. You're a vegetarian, but everyone around you is eating meat. And
Yeah.
you've heard rumors about, people killing each other for
Yeah.
short slights. And
Mm.
you have to do business, sometimes offer credit, and you don't know whether the money will come back to you. That requires courage. It requires the ability to take a risk.
Yeah.
In the old days, when they went to Aden, for example, they had to go through a place called Sokotra, where they have built a temple called Sikoteri Ma, because they wanted to worship that goddess so that the trade winds would be nice to them when they went to Aden and then further down south to Mombasa. Third, if you go to the deep south in the United States, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, and states like that,
Yeah.
lots of motels are run by Patel families, and they are all Gujaratis. And to go there in a country, in a region where racism is rife, where violence is common, where even a 19-year-old could come with a gun and ask for, whatever you want, and not necessarily threaten you. But if you are without a gun, you're not going to feel, very brave about facing them, but you have to do business with them.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with it? All of that requires an element of risk taking and
Yeah.
courage.
And courage
Gujaratis
to
have
start
great
from
abundance.
scratch.
Absolutely.
So, Salil, what are some of this, we are all familiar with some of the stereotypes that are associated with Gujaratis and for that matter, for any community. And some of those stereotypes, when you go through them, what would you say to you are, perhaps something that has become part of a stereotype, but not necessarily true anymore, that we need to revisit or relook? So
Yeah. So
just
there are,
one
I
for
think I
sure.
will talk about 3. Yeah, I
Yeah,
will talk about 3 such
yeah.
stereotypes rather quickly. I mean, I know we would have limited time. So, first is vegetarianism. The
Mm,
assumption is that Gujarati, you are a vegetarian.
yeah,
And it's a fair assumption to make because you hear so much about the imposition of vegetarianism in restaurants in Gujarat.
yeah.
It's relative. It's not that simple to go and eat chicken or meat
Mm, mm,
or fish as
mm,
it is in other parts of India, for example. Or you specifically look for restaurants which don't have a Hindu sounding name, and then you would something that ideal lunch home that you might get a biryani there. That
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of you
yeah.
approach that. But if you look at it, look at the coastline.
Mm,
It is just coastline in India. There are lots of fishing communities, and
yes.
they don't buy the fish to sell it to other people. They do eat. 10% of Gujarat's population is Muslim.
Mm,
8 to 9% is Dalit. Lots of Adivasis and Bhils and tribal communities nomadic communities. Parsis are very few but very influential. There
Mm.
are Christians
Yeah.
and there are Rajputs. And
Mm.
if you go to all those places, a lot of meat is eaten. The accurate figure could be closer to 39 or 40%. The dominant castes of Gujarat account for about 5 to 8%. These are the Jains, Brahmins, and upper caste,
Mm.
so-called upper caste people. I prefer to use the term dominant caste about
Mm.
them. And that's a relative minority. Now, I'm not going to make the assumption that therefore majority of Gujaratis eat meat. That may not be true.
Mm.
But to assume that all Gujaratis are vegetarians is wrong. That's one cliche that I would like to
Okay.
debunk. The
Yeah.
other is that Gujaratis are non-violent.
Mm.
Because we always say the land of Gandhi and
Mm.
Ravi Shankar Maharaj, and we talk about all the gurus and impact of Swaminarayan movement and all of that, and we would like to say that we are non-violent. But if you look at per capita violence of communal violence or caste-based violence, there's a lot of that. Violence against women. While
Mm.
women are very strict on the streets, very safe on the streets, they're not necessarily safe inside the home or
Mm.
in a close surrounding. There's a lot of domestic violence in Gujarat. Dowry deaths also a significant number. I'm not saying it is a leader in the country, but you do have quite a few of them that tend to take place or have tended to take place. We don't have accurate more recent statistics,
Mm.
but that's an issue. And communal violence has taken place not only in 2002. People think of 2002 as an aberration, but if you look
Yes.
at 1982, 1986, 1984, 1983, 1982, 1969, 1948, 1920s, there have been bitter communal violence incidents, including 1969, the
Yeah.
year of Gandhi's day. And
And
when it
you
was a
and
very
you talk about that, you explore that quite deeply, isn't it? You go into 1969 and how that year became in, like you said, the centenary of Gandhiji's birth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So during one of my journeys, I'd met Madhav Singh Solanki, who used
Mm.
to be the chief minister of
Yes.
Gujarat. And I'd actually asked him that how
Yeah.
come we are the land of Gandhi? How come we are so violent? And his response has stayed with me. He said that આપણે તો હંમેશા હિંસક હતા, આપણને શાંત કરવા ગાંધીજીની જરૂર પડી, which means that we were always violent, but to calm us down, we needed Gandhi. And I think it's worth thinking and keeping it in mind. So to say that Gujaratis are not violent or that they are always non-violent or that is a bit of a stretch. Of course, many of them are. I'm not saying that the entire, I don't want to tar any community, but all I'm trying to say that every cliche and every generalization has exception, and sometimes those exceptions that formidable and cannot be seen the other way. The third cliche is that the assumption is that the Gujarati who goes abroad only looks after his own or her own needs and only makes money. And one thing I realized that wasn't the case. A lot of Gujaratis became part of freedom struggle of different countries that they went to. So take Zambia.
Yeah.
Kenneth Kaunda fought for freedom. Many of us who know African history would
Mhm.
know his name. India even gave him the Nehru Award in the 1970s, if I recall correctly. But Kaunda's constitution drafter was a man called Vasant Desai, who was Gujarati. When
Mm.
South Africa overthrew apartheid
Yeah.
after the poll, the first speaker of the parliament was Freni Jinwala. She was Parsi. The foreign minister was Aziz Pahad, a Gujarati. And Mandela spent 28 years in the jail,
Mm.
and he was not alone. He was with six other people, including a white Jewish lawyer called Ellsberg, but Goldberg, sorry, Dennis Goldberg. But what happened with at that time was that he had another partner in crime, if you were to call it a crime, called Ahmad Bhai Kathrada, who was a Gujarati. So Gujaratis have been very much part of the anti-apartheid struggle. Amina Kachalia being one of them, Fatima Mir's father Ismail Mir being another one, and Gandhi's grandson was there, and he ran Indian Opinion there. He was very active and prominent in this. You go to London and you find that the first trade union formed only by women for their rights and of women of color was run by a 5'2" Gujarati woman called Jayaben Desai, who took on a 6 feet man who was a owner of a company who was treating the women who worked in a photo studio
Mm.
called Grunwick in an extremely bad. That strike lasted 2 years.
So,
And finally, if you look at taxi drivers in New
yeah.
York, that union is also run by Bhairavi Desai.
Mm.
So these are the people who are change makers, trailblazers, reforming society and working with the downtrodden wherever they are. So it's not that they only go abroad to make money, but also sometimes to be part of the society and improve it.
So, one of the reasons that the stereotype of the transactional trader, the businessman, these stereotypes or these features associated with Gujaratis or the Gujarati community is because of the astounding business success that they have achieved, isn't it? And in our country, almost all the legendary businessmen and corporate houses have been started by Gujaratis. Is there a reason that you can attribute for this? I mean, you don't hear of big Bengali industrialists, right? You just don't. So what is it
We hear
that?
about great Bengali writers and filmmakers, though.
Sure, you do. So I'm saying, what is it that, because you have a chapter on the business success or the commercial success that Gujaratis achieve and the value that they put to money, right? Money is important. So just take us through this a bit.
I
What did
think
your
it's a
book
desire to
do?
become better, a desire to be better, and desire to be better on your own terms. So
Mm,
Gujaratis don't like by Gujaratis I mean all Gujaratis. I'm
yeah.
not only talking about the trading communities, but you will find this among Muslims, among Parsis, everywhere. They don't necessarily want to depend on anybody else
Mm,
to do it for them.
mm.
So a very small instructive example was what NGOs which work in Kutch during the earthquake
Earthquake.
told me.
Yeah.
Yeah, after the 2001 earthquake, because I think the year before or the year before that, there was a cyclone in Orissa.
Mm,
And I mean, this is not to speak poorly of any community, but people in Orissa waited to get help from the government
mm,
because they knew that this is a major catastrophe. We can't deal with it on our own. And therefore, we have to depend on aid agencies and governments to do it, which is perfectly reasonable because the cyclone was devastating. Many people had died. Kutch too had an earthquake, but the people, it's such a remote region and the
mm,
government is so far that
mm,
they said we have to take it in our hand. So when charities, including the RSS and including Muslim organizations and including non-sectarian organizations came to help them out, they started helping each other and they started moving up. So Gujaratis like to believe that
mm,
they can succeed in spite of the government. They
mm,
like to have a government to help them in certain ways by giving them better tax rates, not taxing them too much, and creating fewer and fewer encumbrances in their desire to become prosperous. But at the same time, they do like the government which gives them favorable contracts. They
mm.
do like the government which has bidding system which
Yeah.
they can be successful at. So I
Mm,
think that, another indicator of that is that we had a party in India called Swatantra,
yeah.
which was very popular in from early. In fact, going back to late 50s, because Rajagopalachari was part of the party, Munshi was part of the party for a while.
Mm,
So it had a very strong ethos of free enterprise and individual freedom. Initially, it started out in that way. So I wouldn't call it conservative with a small or a big C, but it was pro individual rather than pro collective.
mm,
But then what happened? And later, of course, the princely states
mm,
and the Rajasthani and Saurashtra royal families took control of that movement. But Swatantra Party did really well in elections in the late 60s, in certain states and early 70s. And one state where they did very well was Gujarat. They couldn't have formed a government on their own, but
mm.
they certainly had their stalwarts, right? Minu
Yeah.
Masani, Pir Modi, all these were Swatantra Party politicians. So there is this desire that an individual can do and build their own future. Khamir, these
Mm.
are the kind of words here, and therefore they.
What does
I mean,
Khamir mean?
Khamir basically means self belief and that I can
Right.
do it.
Right.
That kind of a
So,
culture.
so because you used a Gujarati word, there is another Gujarati word that we in the rest of India have got very used to in the last, decade and more. And you talk about it and you probe it quite deeply, and that word is asmita. Give us a sense of how, because in the book you seem to suggest that this word and asmita has changed in the way, in what it means or what it's understood to mean as the decades have gone by. You also mentioned a gentleman just now in the context of the Swatantra Party, that is, Kanhaiya Lal Munshi.
Munshi.
Kanhaiya, yeah. So
Kanai Lal Munshi, yes.
Yes. Can you explain to us in the context of the word Asmita and the role Mr. Munshi played via the novels he wrote, which you talk about in the book, in this idea of Asmita and what it means and how it defines the Gujarati community?
Yeah. So to understand the word, I came, in fact, to this city where I am today, Vadodara,
Yeah.
and I met the famous poet Sitanshu Yashashchandra, and he broke down the word to me, and he basically said it comes from the Sanskrit root word as and asmi,
Mm,
and that means me and my awareness of who I am.
mm,
Essentially, asmita means awareness of your own being and self-awareness. It's just knowing who you are. That is what it is. Now, from that, the next transition point is what we're trying to understand and unpack what it means. So, if we were to just look at it historically, Narsi Mehta talks about collective we, that, and he talks about, Paksha Pakshitya Nahi Parmeshwar, Samadrashi Sarva Saman, which means that wherever there's partiality and partisanship, there is no God. You have to look at everyone as an equal. And he's the one who goes out of the way to, merge with and work with and sing with and pray with and dance with the Dalits. And he brings about kind of a unity. This is all in 16th century. We are talking about medieval Gujarat. From there, we come to another writer called Narmad, who was in Surat. And he talks about a word called Swabhiman. He's so self-awareness becomes self-pride. Now, self-pride is different from self-arrogance. I shall come to that in a second. But Narmad is writing in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. So again, sometime in the 19th century. And he writes about that through his poetry. And he gives voice to Gujarati identity. The song of Gujarat, the national, not national, but the state song of Gujarat, Jai Jai Garbi Gujarat, goes back to that comes from him. From there, you come from that self-pride, and it comes the notion of the collective as against just the individual. Because, if you focus only on and that comes from Govardhan Ram Tripathi and Saraswati Chandra. What he does, that yes, you are important, but so is your family. And sometimes you have to curb your individual instincts and follow what the family wants. And that's the novel Saraswati Chandra. We won't get
We've seen the movie with Nutan in it. Many of us have seen the movie, even if we haven't read the book.
Yes, and it's been translated beautifully now by Tridip Surud. So that's another set of novels I would highly recommend to read. And from that, what we come to is what Munshi does, because Munshi writes this essay called Gujarati Asmita. And what he does is that he comes up with, because of the 3 novels he's written called Patani Prabhuta, Gujaratno Nath, Rajadhiraj, and they've been translated by Rita and Abhijit Kothari for Penguin. And what you find from those novels is a nostalgic evocation of the Solanki era Gujarat. This is the Gujarat before Ghazni comes and invades the Somnath temple. This is the Gujarat before the sultans come into action. And if you unpack that and try to figure out what he's talking about, is that was a golden age, that somehow things went downhill after that. Now, that's when self-pride verges and moves towards a nostalgic yearning for a past, which makes people arrogant. And that arrogance then becomes politicized when the Narmada agitation takes place. What happens at that time is that collectively, every politician cutting across political party, whether it is Solanki, Chimanbhai Patel, Sanat Mehta, Keshubai Patel, whichever party they are part of, they all start talking that if only we have this dam, we will be fine. And whoever stops it is an enemy of the state. And this is Gujarat's Asmita, and they're attacking Gujarat's Asmita. And that turns to bigotry after 2002. When after the Gaurav Yatra that is led by the BJP, after the riots are over and before the election of 2002, later in the year, it creates this narrative where it becomes a license to say that we are great, others are not, and it starts dividing the community. So the tragic becomes from self-awareness to bigotry.
So the way in which Asmita has evolved and the way what it has come to mean politically today in 2025 is about excluding the Muslim. And in your book, you'll go quite deeply into this kind of, the exclusion of Muslims from the larger fabric of Gujarati life, in spite of the fact that these are people who have the same language, who have the same cultural and historical references. It's only religion that marks Muslim Gujaratis apart from Hindu and Parsi and Jain Gujaratis. Give me a sense of what Muslim Gujaratis communicate to you today about how they feel about being Gujarati. And you've spoken to a lot of professionals, especially in the book, and you seem to suggest that they see education as a way to better their conditions and better their lot in life. But what about working class Muslim Gujaratis?
2 things you hear from them. One is that they feel that if they apply for jobs, because people see their names, they are not likely to get even called for interviews, and that you hear routinely. And that's not unique in Gujarat. I mean, I'm sure it could be, the mood of the mood is such that it is happening in other parts of India too. So I'm not saying it is a unique trait here, but as a result of that, you do find that people are from speaking from a perspective that you're not going to get it. And then what do? Therefore, you try to become a professional. Now, that could mean becoming plumbers and carpenters and artisans where they've always been. or continuing with their artisanal traditions, the zari work and
Yeah.
embroidery work. Because Muslims are very adept and exceptionally skillful,
Yeah.
or become professionals such as, becoming chartered accountants and lawyers, and they
Where you're
start servicing.
self-employed, where you rely on your own devices, which is very Gujarati,
Absolutely.
isn't it?
It is indeed. And that's what I found from the story of Nadim Jafri, who basically decided to start creating mini supermarkets in
Mm,
rural Gujarat, targeting areas which were underserved. And typically, the underserved were areas where,
mm,
it was a large number of Dalits lived there, or large number of Muslims lived there, where the large stores did not necessarily service. So when he started this company called Hearty Mart, and when he first opened in Juhapura, which
mm.
is a large Muslim area in
Yeah.
Ahmedabad, some companies were reluctant to supply. They said, but how can there be a market there? Because the assumption was that Muslims are dependent on charity. But that was not the case. He saw market, and he's built such a wonderful business enterprise now. It also operates in Dubai now. And he's the subject of a case by IIM, and Professor Alag has written a book about him. So, I mean, obviously, something that is being done right. But parallel, this is the positive side of it.
Yes.
But the disappointing side is that many of them have also given up hope in the judiciary to
Mm,
give them justice for what happened in 2002.
mm,
Because a lot of people, even well meaning Hindu Gujaratis, will say that, let's forgive and forget. Let's move on. It's time. What happened was terrible, but let's move on. Now, as a idea in isolation, that's a very good. What could be nicer than to have a peace and reconciliation between the communities? But as I've learned from my work as a journalist and writer in Bangladesh, about which I wrote a book, or what I've seen in South Africa and Cambodia through my work in human rights, that when you have a major catastrophic event, and when people say, let's forgive and forget, before forgiveness, there has to be an expression of remorse.
mm,
Somebody will say that what I did was wrong and I'm sorry. Once you say that, it's possible to say, okay, you said sorry, accept the apology, and let's move together and build a common future. But that hasn't yet happened. There is a silence around that. And I think that silence needs to be broken. I'm optimistic enough that it can be broken, because when you meet people on the ground in Gujarat and in Gujaratis, yes, there is overall, outward expression of certain kind of aggressive outlook. But at heart, at the same time, when I was looking at the stories, yes, of course, there was a lot of violence in 2002, but I've found cases of BJP corporators going out of the way and
mm.
helping Muslim communities which were in
Yeah,
distress.
you
So there
actually
is
you
reason
you
to.
listed a lot of people who have gone against the tide, isn't it? And gone
Yeah,
against what you expect they would normally do.
because the world is grey, it is not black and white.
Yeah, yeah. Um, would you agree with me if I said, when people talk about the Gujarat model and transplanting it to the rest of India, in this particular case of the way the state and the larger society, the majority of society has treated the Muslims, that seems to have been successfully transplanted in many other states of India today. Would you agree, or do you think
I'm
that's a bit extreme, my statement?
I wouldn't say it's extreme, but I would hesitate before agreeing. The reason is that I don't live here. I mean,
Mm,
if I lived in India and saw it day to day, continuously, I may
mm,
have a more informed view. But looking at it from a distance, it seems to me that it's more visible,
mm,
it's more noisy. That, I mean, people want to celebrate Hindu festivals by going in front of churches and
mm,
mosques and creating a lot of racket around it, or if you, property of. But it's not just the property of Muslims that get raised. It's also human rights
yeah,
defenders and dissidents,
yeah.
which also tend to get affected by that. Or,
Mm,
the cases are being instituted and so on. But there are vast parts of India where it doesn't happen. And
d-
vast parts of India, where the violence that takes place is
mm,
not about Hindus and Muslims. What happens in Manipur has
yeah,
nothing to do with Hindus and
yeah.
Muslims. It's about one form of people with power and majority exercising it over those who have been deprived of the power that is their right. And I think it's a power struggle that's going on, where religion, of course, becomes an easy way to enter the debate, but it's not the only way. And I think the tumult is largely because of the fact that population and its expectations are rising
Mm,
extremely rapidly, and that rising expectation can be met through jobs growth, which
mm,
has been relatively sluggish, and
mm,
therefore people are looking for other ways of earning money, which also shows why the gig economy is rising.
Yeah, India inevitably goes through language debates, the primacy of language, Hindi versus Southern languages. And we are right in the middle of another such debate where, very famously, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu has reacted to the national education policy and says it's the three language formula is a way of inserting Hindi into the curriculum for Southern states. As a linguist, as somebody who studied in his mother tongue growing up in your early school years, what do you make of this debate? And in the context of linguistic communities, also as someone who lives in a country where, in America today.
Yeah, I think what's the crucial thing to bear in mind is that language is something we are born with, what we start speaking, what our parents teach us. I mean, and if the parents are of different languages, we are lucky that we get two languages to start with and not just one. And then the state's language and the national language. And knowing more language is always a desirable thing. I speak, other than English, I speak four Indian languages reasonably well, read them, write them, and understand them. And I think that there is the advantage of coming from a cosmopolitan city like Bombay, where Salman Rushdie famously said the city's language is called Hugme, Hugme, which is Hindi, Urdu, Gujarati, Marathi, English. And that's, I mean, quite accurate. And it's wonderful to be able to do that. Mm. The problem arises when one language is given supremacy and it is being forced on people. And I think, again, speaking as an outsider looking into Tamil Nadu and the politics, and we've learned it from the 60s, right? Yeah. The DMK and the whole Dravid movement resents an imposition. They're very happy with English and Tamil, and they are not prohibiting anyone from learning Hindi or Gujarati or Marathi. No one stopped from doing that. But when it is being imposed and letters are being sent only in Hindi, that is a problem. And I think multilingual cities have it. One of the things that I feel sad about is that years ago, when I was growing up in Mumbai, when you went in a suburban train, the rectangular boards which named the station,
the diamond shape. They were the squares placed as diamonds in the diamond shape.
Yeah, and they were always in four languages, right? That was Hindi, Gujarati, English, Marathi. This time when I've traveled, I've seen the Gujarati being, even in areas like Vileparle and Ghatkopar, which are largely which are huge Gujarati population, the Gujarati name signs have been taken away. So I think this some kind of an imposition is coming through, and which is not a desirable thing. And believing in your own language and speaking in it, and it's not something Tagore believed in Bengali, Gandhi believed in Gujarati, and Gandhi actually tweaked the ears of Muhammad Ali Jinnah when at an event in Bombay in 1916, soon after Gandhi came back from South Africa, the Gujarati Samaj was felicitating Gandhi, and Jinnah was one of the speakers, and he spoke in English. And at that time, Gandhi kind of taunted him very mild way that at a Gujarati Samaj, why are we speaking in a foreign language? He did say that. So I think there is this pride in your own language is good. But again, to go back to that asmita conversation we had, that pride should not become arrogance, and it should not become a requirement speaking in that language. And to de-Persianize a language or de-Arabicize a language, that is a problem. When you have to struggle to understand the Hindi being spoken on television as though it is Sanskrit, that is a problem. Why can't we say Thanda Pani instead of Sheetal Jal as an example? You see a lot of water cooler, and why do we use words that are more complicated when simpler forms do exist? And I think that's the problem. I think what Tamil Nadu is resisting is not so much is the imposition, and I think that's the problem there. I don't think Tamil Nadu is ever going to stop anyone from learning Hindi. Just as and I think some of the people in the South have been pointing out that they learn Kannada, English, and Hindi. How many states in the north teach a non-northern language to people? We also have to remember that Gujarat itself is a multilingual state. About 86 to 90% of the people speak what we call Gujarati, but Kutchi, Bhavsari, Kathiawadi, all these are other languages. Bhil speak about Bhili, which is a different kind of a language again. I mean, it has some commonalities in it, but Kutchi and Gujarati, when they're spoken, they're chalk and cheese. Kutchi sometimes sounds closer to Sindhi. Marathi is spoken in Gujarati because of Maharashtra and because of the influence of Gaikwad family in the southern part in Maharashtra state and so on. So there's a lot of diversity in Gujarati too. And there's a saying in Gujarati, Bar Boli Badlai, which means every 12th village you have a different language. And I think it's and it is a language. There's a thing about language and dialect. What is a dialect but a language without an army?
That's a lovely way of saying it. Let's close this conversation with a sense of how this book has been received in Gujarat by Gujaratis, and what is the feedback you're getting to hear?
So I have been, we all live in our bubbles, right? So the people who are in touch with me, a lot of them are progressive and liberal Gujaratis, they seem to like it.
Mm,
Some of them curious because they've said they've always looked at Gujarat internally, the way we are, from
mm,
what we hear in Gujarat. You're one person who is a Gujarati, who's outside and looking at it from outside, from the Bombay perspective, as one poet told me. And it's
mm,
very interesting because we never saw it the way you have seen it. Now, what that distinction is, I've not unpacked it. It has not been reviewed here yet. I've written one article in Gujarati in a very leading magazine called
mm,
Navneet Samarpan.
mm.
But other than that, it has not been reviewed in the state. It has been written about in one English newspaper. I mean, Ahmedabad Mirror did a long piece about it when soon after it came out. I hope it will get talked about. Of course, there's a limitation. It's written in English and it's
Yeah,
published in English. So
yes.
to that extent, there is a limitation. And my hope is it will get translated. My brother Pranav is working on that translation. So I hope it finds a publisher, it finds a voice, and it becomes part of the conversation. Not because I want it to be prominent and in every bookshelf, but I want it to be talked about. I want people to engage and debate with me and challenge me because mine is a view on Gujarat and Gujaratis. Mine is not the view. I'm not arrogant enough to think that what I say is right. I mean, I'm sure many of my opinions people will have disagreements with, but so far I've tried very hard to be not balanced in the left and right are equal way, but to listen to each side and give the respect the other viewpoint deserves, and then dissect it and then unpack it.
One of the things I really enjoyed was how you have liberally interspersed it with Gujarati phrases. And as someone who was born and brought up in Mumbai, many of those are actually easy to understand, because
Yeah.
again, it's a language that I have grown up hearing around me. So even if I don't speak it, I'm familiar with many words, many sounds, and it was fun to read. The phrases you have used throughout the book, and the literary approach, the literary heritage, starting the book from that perspective was also very interesting to me. I hope your book reaches the audience. It deserves a large audience, not just in the Gujarati community, but in India. It talks about a community that has had a huge impact on this country, and with a great deal of nuance. And for that, thank you.
Thank you so much for this conversation. And it's always a pleasure listening to you. So I'm glad that I was able to do it face to face with you this time. Yeah.
And here, this is the Gujaratis. For anybody who's watching this conversation, you should get your hands on this book. It's a great read, and it gives you a lot of insight into a community of people who are in different walks of life and have reached very iconic positions. Would you say, I can't resist this last parting question, would you say Kash Patel is now going to be one of the most powerful Gujaratis in this world? Of course, the two most powerful Gujaratis are Mr. Modi and Mr. Shah here in India. Would you say Kash Patel will be the third most
Well,
powerful?
I'm not sure what would Mukesh Ambani and Gautam Adani feel if you call only Mr. Shah and Mr. Modi being important from India. But that said, yes, Kash Patel is going to be an important player, but because
I
he's
think politically,
FBI.
I mean, I was staying in the political
No, no,
space.
fair enough, fair enough. Fair enough. No, but I think Kash Patel, since I live in the US, he will have a huge impact, but he will have a huge impact within the US because he's with the FBI and
Yes.
not the CIA. And to
Mm.
that extent, what he can do or wishes to do abroad will have less an impact. But because he's with FBI, he will have a great role to play about the foreigners who can come into the country. So to that extent, yes, he will have a significant impact. But he is a controversial character.
Yeah.
And as that famous Wild West movie, the good, the bad, and the ugly, it takes all kinds. There was Sardar Patel and there's Kash Patel, and you pick and choose which one do you want with you.
Salil, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.